ladies and gentlemen, we've hit 6 o'clock and I believe we're ready to start our virtual meeting. I'm going to turn everything over to the supervisor, Ron Steica, supervisor. Please take these away.
All right, good evening. Welcome to another meeting of the Meridian Township Board via the virtual computer world. I'd like to call the meeting to order officially, and we should all say the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't think we need to rise. It's kind of chaotic when we're on the screen. So, I pledge allegiance
to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yeah, that doesn't go over very well because we all blah, 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 but that's, we do our best. Okay, we need a roll call from our clerk, Mr. Dreyfus.
Treasurer DeShane. Treasurer DeShane. Okay, I don't hear Treasurer DeShane present.
He just joined.
Did he?
He's here. His picture is here. He was having difficulty. He was working with Steve earlier.
Okay. Trustee Jackson.
There
Here.
he is.
Trustee Opsimer.
Here.
Trustee Sunland.
Here.
Trustee Wazinski.
Here.
Supervisor Steica.
Here.
Clerk Dreyfus is present. All members are accounted for.
Thank you. We have a presentation, and it's from the coronavirus task force. I believe that'll be the chief of our fire department, Mr. Hamill.
Yes, thank you, Supervisor. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see everybody again for been a couple weeks. So obviously, if you've been watching the news, the numbers are coming down nicely. Hopefully within a couple weeks, we can get open back up like the UP and upper lower and some other states. And that would be really nice to get back to the new norm and get everybody out and about again. Some changes, I'm assuming. So police and fire, this, our numbers are still down. We're still maintaining. We haven't had anybody test positive, so we've been really good with that. I know the hospitals are downsizing their COVID testing facilities. Sparrow is getting ready to close theirs for first responders over the next week. They don't see there's a need. So if we have anybody that gets exposed, then we'll look at other avenues. MSU still does it and others. Just a reminder, those out in the public, for your the COVID hotline, 517-853-4040. That's 517-853-4040. That's if you want to call and ask any questions about anything. We're here to help. I also would like to touch briefly on the flooding we have in the township. We do have a few streets closed. I'm going to read through those briefly. So Van Atta, Jolly to Grand River, that area is closed due to flooding. Okemos Road, obviously north of Central Park, where we have flooding. Nakoma at Indian Hills, by the bridge and around the corner is closed. Tacoma, and that's actually also with Birchwood, between Penobcost and driving Tacoma Boulevard. And then Hillcrest, there's also water laying on the road at Okemos from just past Mount Hope around the curve by Myers. So just be careful driving around there. It's nothing that's unpassable, just a lot of water flying. Other than that, things are going well. Joyce, Director Marks, and Mr. Perry have been working feverishly on a reopening plan. I think they've got a decent plan. It most likely is going to be tweaked weekly due to changes from the public health and from the state. But we're really looking forward to some good changes in the near future to get everybody back to work. That's all I have. Does anybody have any questions?
No questions for the chief? Yeah, I don't see any. I think you're off the hook, Chief Hamill.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you. We now come to citizens addressing agenda and non-agenda items. And I'm wondering if Mr. Geeves is ready for that.
We are ready for that. The telephone number people can call into is 517-349-1232. Again, the telephone number is 517-349-1232. We're also prepared to take comments via Zoom itself. If there's somebody in the attendee list right now that would like to make a public comment, they are welcome to raise their hand, and we'll give them the ability to speak. Otherwise, we'll pause momentarily for the supervisor to give a quick overview of what public comments are intended to do during this meeting, and we'll go. The telephone number one last time, and it will be available again at the end of the meeting, 517-349-1232, or feel free to raise your hand inside the Zoom interface itself.
As was said, we have two chances for the public to comment. This is the first one, and the other one will be near the end of the meeting. If you call in to comment, please remember to announce who you are, your name, your address, and then you will be limited to 3 minutes. You will be timed. We'll try to give you a little bit of a warning. It's a little more difficult with this system. We'll give you a warning as you come down towards your 3 minutes. Please, if at all possible, keep the subjects that we have before us, although you're free to do other things, but it helps our meeting move along. And be civil, address the board collectively and not individuals, and not anyone else who might be viewing the meeting. Mr. Geebies, do we have any phone calls yet?
There are no telephone calls at this time. We do have an architect who's trying to call in, and I'll be working with him for the next few minutes to try and get him connected.
Okay, he wants to call in for purposes of the public comment or for some other aspect?
It's for, they're making some type of presentation later in the meeting. I'll be working with them on that particular issue.
Okay.
It's going to be for Pine Village, Ron.
All right, thank you. All right, then we don't need to worry about that right now. All right, now we come to the Township Manager's Report. Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Supervisor and Board. I'll start with saying last week was marked my 7th year here with the Township, and I just want to thank the Board. I really enjoyed the opportunity to work with you and the team that I get to work with, and our residents. So thank you for that. We have been working on, dating back to Mr. Buck's service in economic development. We've been working for months on the former Toys R Us building, and working with Home Depot on the deed restrictions that they have on the building. And I won't go through the whole litany of story tonight, but we're making great progress with bringing a company into the Toys R Us building. And I just want to thank, we shouldn't forget who was here before as well. Thank Mr. Buck for his work on that, and Mr. Lane going forward. Silverleaf Development, you may recall that was a contentious issue back maybe a year ago. There's a plan that's been submitted, and we're working. We've reached out to the community, the Champion Woods and other community, and we'll be having some informational meetings going forward best we can between Mr. Menser and Mr. Kieselbach in the neighborhood. We met with a police candidate today. That's kind of unusual, simply because there just aren't many police candidates out there, but a young man from Midland who's in the Delta Academy, I believe. Chief Plug and I met with him today. Farmers Market, we had our opening start at the Meridian Mall site. We want to thank them all for working with us, for allowing us to use their site, and thank Luann and her team for pulling that off. I know we actually had police department, our department over there as well, just to make sure everyone was adhering to the standards that are set right now for having such a venue, but it went off without a hitch. At this time, I'd ask Mr. Perry to quickly update the board on an emergency sanitary work that started today, and the HVAC project as well that is obviously ripping apart the building right now. Mr. Perry?
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Manager Walsh. Just quick updates on the HVAC system that's been underway for a couple weeks now. Contractors are in here. Essentially, tearing apart the building. The boiler's been removed. Ceiling tiles are removed in a lot of locations, and they're just starting to piece some of the stuff back together. So it's a big inconvenience for the people that are here. I just request their patience as we move through this process. When it's all said and done, the heating and cooling in the building will be a lot better than what it has been in the past. And I look forward to not having to deal with multiple concerns about that when the second floor is on fire and the first floor is freezing. So that'll be good. In regards to the emergency sanitary sewer repair, we received some information this afternoon that there was an issue with both the pipe. We have an 8-inch sanitary along Hamilton Road east of the roundabout. We did some inspections on that, and there was an actual defect in the pipe. So we called our emergency contractor in, and they're assisting us with that repair. The pipe's been opened up. They should have the repair done here within the next few hours. And then we'll have the road restored at least to grade and get the road open for the night. And then tomorrow we'll come in and do the more permanent patch on it. But that's kind of where we're at with that situation. Just so folks know, Hamilton is closed where the pipe's located. We had to do a full closure. So east of Marsh and west of Kingwood is where that closure is taking place. But again, it should be open within a few hours. That's it.
Thank you.
Questions?
Thank you, Jerry. And continuing on, we're working on the reopening of the building. And we're looking at a reopening on June 1st. If that matches with what the plans are from the state. I want to credit Director Marks, who's really led that charge from start to finish with help from others, but she's really been instrumental in making that happen. We're also working on that outdoor service center that we've talked about. Mr. Givas is leading that charge, and we hope to put that in place. Some of us met with the Village of Okemos officials last week talking about the buildings and how do we get the buildings removed and as quickly as possible. And we're going to keep working on that. And I know that that's important to the supervisor and others. Fire contract, we have presented our final offer to the fire department, and it's possible that the contract could be before the board at their June 16th meeting. Again, I want to thank our council, Lizzie Mills at Fahey and Joyce Marks, our director. You know, HR directors don't get much credit for what they do, but they're really kind of the backbone of the organization. I want to thank our police and fire departments for the birthday and celebrations that they've been going around and completing throughout the neighborhoods. I heard from Joel Kuhn over the weekend. His son was honored for his 8-year-old birthday, and Joel's a member of our EDC board, and he was very complimentary of what we're doing. The Brownfield board meets Thursday morning. We have a Brownfield request from the Hazlet gas station, and you can expect at your next meeting on June 2nd to hear reports from the 2019 audit and the big hit we're going to take in revenue sharing like everybody else. The good news is it's not, well, the Treasury told Director Madison and I and everybody else in the state 4 weeks ago to expect about 50%. It's not going to be 50%, but it's still going to be significant for a lot of communities. And we know those numbers now, and we're going to have to adjust our budget accordingly. The realignment plan that we put in place based on the revenue sharing losses that were going to occur has been implemented. There's still going to be a hiring freeze throughout the rest of the year. But if everything holds, we should be able to look at doing some, and that's going to be up to the board here in a couple months. Once we get the audit back and we've adjusted for the revenue sharing loss, the board's going to be able to consider some capital projects yet for 2020 because the revenue sharing loss is not, well, it's significant, but not as significant as what the Department of Treasury said. And in asking the question as to why, I was surprised by the response. Online, they just had their revenue sharing conference on the 15th, and online sales tax was up quite a bit from what was expected. And that's helping to not have a 50% reduction, but certainly big reductions coming forward. So that's my report, unless there's any questions, Mr. Supervisor.
Are there any questions for the manager? I'm looking across my screen here. Ms. Jackson, unmute, please unmute.
Yes, I was wondering, Mr. Walsh, what's the timeline for completion of the HVAC project?
I believe, and Mr. Perry can correct me if I'm wrong, but we hope to be completed and out of the building in October. So we will have no air from now until, and no heat. The heat was an issue 2 weeks ago when it was 50-some degrees in the building. But we hope, Trustee Jackson, we hope to be completed by October and open the parking lot back up in November.
Any other questions for the manager?
Thank you.
I don't see any. I guess you're off the hook, Mr. Walsh. We now move on to board member reports of activities and announcements. Who wants to go first? Oh, yeah, I do see a hand. Mr. DeShane, please unmute. You're still muted. There you go.
Thank you, Supervisor Stika. I'd like to report on May 7th, I attended the Economic Development Corporation meeting, the first one we really had since the COVID-19 outbreak. And so it was our economic director first full meeting there, did introductions and overview of the economic development that's still going on in the township despite the pandemic. Interesting note was we wanted to get an update from the mall, and we did have a mall representative there. However, he came on his own time. He'd been furloughed by the mall, so it really speaks to the seriousness of this crisis when so many of the staff at the mall have been laid off by CBL. Still, we're hopeful. This week was involved with our Meridian Trees 2020 project. As the board might remember, we gave the Environmental Commission $10,000 for environmental grants. They're hoping to plant trees within the boundaries of the township land or the school district land. With the pandemic, they haven't had much progress with the schools, and the school has not been in place. We were gifted 50 trees, which will be given out this weekend at the farmers market. So our first 50 trees will be given out this weekend. So if you want a free tree, come to the farmers market. Look for us. This week, tomorrow will be the Meridian East Lansing Chamber Roundtable session. I'll be attending that. And then Thursday is the BRA meeting, Brownfields Redevelopment Authority, and we'll be looking very closely at the proposal from the Hazard Road Marathon to clean up the significant brownfield there before that site gets redeveloped. A project the board has had its eye on for 3.5 years now. So the BRA will see that proposal on Thursday. That's my report.
Thank you very much. Other board members? Clerk Dreyfus, unmute, please.
Thank you, Supervisor. Just a couple of points to bring up. First, with respect to elections, right now we have we're in like fast rapids on a river, and so things are moving quickly. Things are changing from day to day. I think most people are apprised of what's going on through the news because it's making mainstream news. AV applications possibly being mailed to all voters statewide is being looked at. There's different components that are being worked out and work in conjunction with local municipalities. We are having some difficulty getting election workers as usual. Every year you hear the same story. The board members and community hear me say this at every election. We always need election workers. However, primary summer elections are always staffed less because people are on vacation, obviously, and it's the time it's a little more difficult to get people to come to staff an election. They were talking about our precinct workers. In this particular election, we're getting some concerns that people have, of course, about how we're going to account for health concerns and how we're going to do virus protection and things like that. And of course, that's also in processes. We're looking at ways beyond just hand sanitizer and how we're going to disinfect tables and how we're going to maintain 6-foot distancing and how we're going to do an absentee voter counting board that has 6-foot distancing when it's a very, very tight space and people have to work close together actually to kind of function effectively. So these are all issues that we're working on right now to try to deal with in preparation for the election. Two other issues that I wanted to just bring up as just general matters that all board members received a letter twice in this last last few months from this Freedom from Religion Foundation. And I just wanted to ask a question to find out what we're doing. I had a citizen ask me what's going on and I answered, I didn't know. I didn't know what's going on. So this is a question. I don't know if it's to the township manager or to the supervisor. We have a letter from the Freedom from Religion Foundation that had concerns about an event that Meridian Township co-sponsored, a pancake breakfast. And it was at the 242 church. And they raised two issues. The first issue is the fact that it's a Boy Scout organization and that the Boy Scouts in their bylaws are religious-based organization, and they had concerns about separation of church and state, as the organization has their policies, and in the letter they reference those. The second concern they listed was the location of the fundraiser took place in a church, and they felt that there should be, again, a separation of church and state, and they quoted some things about that. And the previous letter a few months ago dealt with firefighters, Meridian Township firefighters, wearing their official uniforms in that kind of church setting, and they also expressed concerns that their firefighters should be allowed to express whatever views they want, but they shouldn't be wearing official uniforms when doing it. So I'm asking if we can get some sort of where things are with that question that was raised by this organization, Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm sure.
If I saw those letters, I don't recall them. Mr. Walsh, do you have any comment with regard to it? Did you see these letters?
Yes, I've seen them, and it's my understanding everyone's entitled to their opinion. They have theirs, and we certainly have ours. But if the board wants to go in a different direction, they can. This is the firefighters union that puts this on, and there is a difference between the union doing something and, say, the fire department. This is something that they do, and kudos to them. They're out raising money, and the Boy Scouts and all of this. And this is a good location for it. Been there for a number of years. I didn't plan a response to them. I'm not sure it's in order. But if the board wants to respond to them or decide how they want to respond to them, actually, in this instance, with the Scouts and setting aside the church, the only other thing they could do is to move. That would be like the only alternative, because they're not going to go do this. They're proud of their uniforms. They're proud of their service, and they're not. It's going to be an affront to them to ask them to do this, but you can't wear your uniform. So that's not a solution. The only solution would be to move it out of a church. And that would be something that if the board wants to, we could talk to the fire department about that. I don't see a reason to do that, but we could do that.
Mr. Dreyfus, anything else you want to say on that?
No, I just wanted to get clarification. That's all. I thought it was important that that it just be raised and find out where things are at. So I just wanted to see if it's worthy of further discussion. We can think about it. If some board members want to think about this themselves personally, we could always entertain this as a topic for discussion at the year coming up.
From what I heard, this is not a township function. This is a union function. So that answers part of it. The other thing is from my experience in the past, first as an attorney, but secondly, being on an Okemos school board, just to use a venue that might be a church, as long as the function itself is not religious, it's not a problem. That's, there may be some other people that may legally debate that, but for example, Okemos would often hold functions at various churches because of the size and the need for the location. And they were not considered religious events. They just happened to be located in a building that was otherwise used for religious purposes. That's what I thought was going on here. Mr. Dreyfus, you're still.
Am I on?
Yeah, you're all right. Yeah.
Okay. So my comment in response to that is, it's good to hear this information. I'm not trying to take the views of necessarily from the Freedom from Religious Foundation. I just think it's important. This letter, we've had several of these letters, and they were pretty specific. So I thought it would just be good that we publicly address that. That's all. My comment on this particular one as well is Meridian Township did promote the event as a pancake breakfast. We did put the banner up on our property. So it's not just the fact that it was the union doing it. Meridian Township itself as an entity has been behind this and has promoted it. So it does make us involved in the event, just to be specific about that. Also, we are very grateful to use churches as polling locations to have our elections held. So to look at the full picture of everything again, they serve a vital role in ensuring that our democracy is maintained, because without them, we'd have a tough time having elections. So there you go with that.
Yeah, it's a reality that often the large venues happen to be churches. Anyway, okay.
Thank you.
And other board members have any reports? Not seeing any hands. I had a few things. Want to mention that I attended, the University of Michigan puts on periodic seminars here in Lansing. They call them the Wolverine Caucus, where they have educators from U of M come in and talk about subjects, and they had one in May, early May, dealing with this whole COVID crisis and opening things up in the future. And there really wasn't a lot new that I heard there that I haven't heard in a lot of other venues. Just went to that. On the 13th, I went to the EDC meeting, our EDC, and that meeting resulted in a recommendation to us that we have on the agenda today with regard to helping out some local businesses. And then also last Friday, our Congresswoman Slotkin had her periodic session with leaders throughout the district from various all the municipalities. And at that one, she basically talked about what was bill that was passed by the U.S. House, which is now sitting at the Senate, no action at this point. So in any event, that's where we're at, and I will now move on unless there's somebody else has one. I will now move on to the approval of the agenda.
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
Moved by Mr. Dreyfus, supported by Ms. Jackson.
Support.
Any need to change or modify the agenda? If not, we need a vote. I guess we have. Mr. Dreyfus.
Supervisor Stika.
Yes.
Clerk Dreyfus votes yes. Treasurer DeShane. Treasurer DeShane, I think you need to unmute.
Yes.
Trustee Jackson.
Yes.
Trustee Opsmer.
Yes.
Trustee Sunland.
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you, clerk.
Agenda is approved.
We now go on to the consent agenda, which is number 9 on our list. It has communications, minutes from May 5, virtual meeting, the bills, and the annual school tax collection agreement. Would someone like to make a motion? Mr. DeShane.
I move we approve the consent agenda as presented to the board.
I think
Support.
Mr. Dreyfus was trying to get in there, so Mr. Dreyfus. All right. Thank you. Any need to pull anything off of this? All right, we need a roll call vote on this one.
Clerk Dreyfus votes yes. Treasurer DeShane.
Yes.
Trustee Jackson.
Yes.
Trustee Opsmer.
Yes.
Trustee Sunland.
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski.
Yes.
Supervisor Stika.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0. Consent agenda is approved.
Thank you very much. We now move on to, we don't have any hearings today, so we'll move on to our action items. The first one is the medical marijuana ordinance amendment, final adoption. Is there a motion?
I move to adopt the resolution approving the amendment to Chapter 40 of the Code of Ordinances, Commercial Medical Marijuana Facilities.
Support.
Okay, moved by Mr. Opsmer, supported by Ms. Wazinski. Discussion. Do we need any report first, Mr. Opsmer, from our staff, or are you ready to talk about it?
Did you get the report on that?
I mean, the cover memorandum here from staff is pretty concise. Legal counsel made the changes based on the amendment that we made at the last meeting. When it was on for introduction, it's on for final adoption. So this would be the final vote to make these changes to the ordinance. I think it's in good order, and we've discussed it now at the previous 3 board meetings. And I think we've sufficiently addressed some of the issues that kind of lingered and were that we did not catch on the original writing of the ordinance. So I'm prepared to vote yes on this evening.
Anyone else want to comment? Okay. I'll just mention that this is not new or eventful. We're basically trying to close some holes and eliminate some confusions with regard to the language that we originally adopted and make it more appropriate in terms of how it reads and how it is interpreted. All right, now we need a vote.
Trustee Jackson.
Yes.
Trustee Opsmer.
Yes.
Trustee Sunland,
Yes.
trustee Wazinski,
Yes.
Something's
Supervisor
happened where everybody's frozen. I think.
Supervisor Stika, we're up to Supervisor Stika. Do you hear us? Hear me?
No, I couldn't hear anybody except for first vote.
Okay,
I vote
everybody
yes,
voted.
but,
Everybody voted affirmative, and it's just up to you. So at you now.
I vote yes.
And I
vote yes.
Clerk Dreyfus votes yes, and Treasurer DeShane.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
We seem to be having a little trouble tonight with our audio.
Maybe on your end. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Okay, let's move on now to 12B, which is our mixed use planned unit development number 19034 Hudson Senior Living. We want to have somebody talk about that first from staff, or somebody want to make the motion? Ms.
I would like
Jackson.
a staff, I think some staff discussion would be helpful.
All right, staff discussion. Mr. Kieselbacher, you on here?
Before you tonight, there's two parts to this request. The first part is the mixed use plan unit development, and the second part is the special use permit. The mixed use portion of this plan is for a project of approximately 10 acres. It's on the western end of Hazlet Village Square site. The mixed use would include a senior housing center for 133 units. And then the mixed use, the commercial portion would be approximately 7,600 square feet. The building that's proposed is going to be 4 stories. The commercial would be on the first floor facing the main entrance to the site off Hazel Road. And the entrance for the senior living component would be on the western side of the building. I'll just mention the special use permit because you'll have that second. That's based on an ordinance that any building 25,000 square feet or larger requires a special use permit. This building is approximately 147,000 square feet. So that's the reason for the special use permit. The Planning Commission, as you know, held public hearings on both of these requests and recommended approval of that. And I know the applicant, Jeff Buck, is here tonight if you have questions for him. And also, he's got his architect available, I believe, to answer questions if you have it regarding the building and the layout of the building.
I think Ms. Jackson wanted to make the motion originally.
I will. I move to adopt the resolution approving mixed-use planned unit development number 19034 to construct a 133-unit senior housing apartment building at 1673 Hazlet Road.
There's a second.
Support.
Supported by Treasurer DeShane. All right. Ms. Jackson, you want to comment on it?
Yes, what is before us tonight includes revisions that were recently to the building elevations, which were not available to us the last time we looked at this. And I'd comment on that to say that I appreciate, as was mentioned in our last meeting, the addition of balconies on the east elevation. I think it improves the overall view of the building. I do wish there were more of them, even on the west and south facing elevations. But as it is presented, I'm very happy to support the development of this, or the approval of this development in our township.
Does someone else want to comment? Yes.
Sorry, that wasn't, one sec.
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. I wasn't a handout, but I do have a couple questions. So Mr. Buck,
I
what
need
you
a-
mind? Is it time for discussion or no?
Did we get a second?
Yes, yeah, we had a second, didn't we?
Okay.
Jane, yes.
And for whatever reason, okay, here we go. Mr. Buck available? There he is.
Yep, I'm here.
Hello. I'd like to second with our trustee Jackson had mentioned that. Thank you for taking into consideration all of our comments. And I also like the change in facade using the balconies. I also think they're probably very useful to the tenants as well. I was wondering, I think we talked a little bit last time about increasing the size of some of the commercial space. And I know you had mentioned they could take up more than one space, but I was wondering like the depth of those commercial spaces and if that's going to be a practical area for particular commercial residents. So I didn't know if that was something you guys considered or if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's something we did consider. It's hard to do with the way the building is designed with that hallway back there. But in talking with our architects, in their experience with these spaces and the way they've got them designed, they can go, they can take up more than one space. And then also the cafe space isn't totally designed yet. And so when that tenant comes in, we're going to have a lot of leeway with them and how they want to design and kitchen space and all the different spaces that they want. And we're sure that we'll be able to get all that space for them.
Is there a potential for, so it looks like, and I'm only seeing for whatever reason, my floor plan got cut off. For that cafe, it looks like the parlor representative to the remainder of the spaces is almost 3 times a commercial space. Is there a potential for that cafe to extend into that parlor space?
Exactly. That's what I envision, is it taking up more of that space as it gets designed by the tenant.
Okay.
They can coexist and one can take more than the other, I guess is the best way to put it.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? I know there were some other hands earlier. Mr. Dreyfus.
Oh, no, I think trustee Opsimer was before me.
That's all right. I called on you. Go ahead.
Okay. I had one question that I hadn't brought up before, but it was important to me at this point to confirm tenant requirements. So just so we can make sure, because I was on the same page, my understanding from the past was that this was going to be market rate apartments for seniors. Is that correct? That the rents were of a certain level that I remember mentioning in the, if I recall correctly, $1,400, $1,500 a month vicinity.
The pricing hasn't been determined quite down to what it's going to be and because of the services that will be provided there. It'll be in a range and depending on the unit size. But it is a senior apartment.
So on the application, a person has to fill out an application and they list their date of birth and they have to be over the age of 55 to be able to.
That's correct.
And just to clarify, this something that I want to make sure I understood too, because maybe it was said, but I didn't see it in the board packets in the past or present about medical assistance. The individuals here are all what would be called on this continuum of care concept. This is fully independent living.
That's correct.
And so there could be, is there an office or somebody for medical? Is there like a 8 to 5 medical care person on site? Or is that not the way this works?
There would be a third party that they would have an office there that if somebody wanted extra services, they can contract with them.
Someone, you mean like a room that a provider rents temporarily, or like a provider would be there all, like, I'm not sure what you mean. Like a provider becomes a tenant there.
They would, yeah, right. They would have office. It would be like an office space.
So if they choose to do that, so if a provider chooses to want to have an office there, that's what they could do.
Correct.
Okay. The other question has to do with changes in the future. Let's say for some reason in 3 or 4 years, some odd economic situation happens and you're having some difficult situation, having occupancy rates not being where you want them to be. What happens with, I guess, the MUPUD and the requirements that it has? I mean, they just simply get changed and can allow other people to move in, or is that how it works? I guess this question is for Mark.
Yeah, if they wanted to change the occupancy as it's being approved, they would come back and request that.
So they go first to the planning commission and then go to the board?
Yes.
Okay. I have another question for the applicant, and that is, I know this was discussed early on, but I do want to just get the final, since we're at the vote time here, I'd like to get that final clarification. We have different developers that believe that different apartment type projects, apartment buildings have some appeal in the township, and I guess the question becomes, why did this have to focus on seniors again, and why was there not an opportunity to have more diversity of tenants in that mix?
We're in the senior housing building, so when we did our market study, that showed a unmet demand in the Meridian Township area, and that's kind of, we've built these and kind of have an idea of where they should go, and look to experts to tell us that our opinion is correct, and that's kind of why we made it here, and that's why we've chosen this demographic and this building type.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yep, thank you.
You're muted, Ron.
Now this time I'm not muted. Mr.
Thank you, Supervisor Steichert. So Jeff, I appreciate the addition of the balconies. I think that's a good aesthetic feature, as well as something that the residents will, of course, enjoy, having that ability to utilize that, have that outdoor space that's private. I still share Trustee Wazinski's concerns about the commercial space and the lack of square footage. When I look at the plans, and somehow I just flipped off of them, you've got in that hallway between the commercial and the rear facilities, on the other side of the hallway on the east facade of the building, it appears that we have 3 apartments down there. And then you've got the fitness and the library, and of course the staircase. So, I mean, if we eliminated essentially 5 units, eliminating those 3 units plus another unit where you could move the fitness and library, or if you could relocate the fitness and library into some of the the northern wing of the facility on Hazlitt Road, then we would have the ability to create, depth there. I know you still need a hallway, especially for the winter months, so that residents can get through, but that hallway could be the back, that west side of that commercial area to separate it. And that would give you a lot more depth. I mean, you're talking about nearly doubling the size of the commercial space, because even combining 2 of these commercial spaces, it's still smaller than, the Hazlitt Bigby, which is one of the smaller coffee shops in the entire Lansing region, just to give scale and perspective here. But if you were to do that, and the hallway were on the back west wall, then you're talking about having, like 2,800 square feet if you combine the 2. If you look at viable restaurants or, a corner market, you need, 5,000-6,000 square feet. So you're still, to really get something desirable, you're still going to want to have depth on the unit and to combine 2 or 3 of them. So I would like to see a site plan that relocates that fitness and library and relocates the hallway. I know the staircases may not be movable, And I understand, the salon may not need that much space. Same with the wellness studio. So you might not need depth right there in those two storefronts, but all along that other frontage, I'd like to see depth so that we could get a real anchor tenant in here. People want a draw and they want something that's new and unique to the community.
Is there any response from Mr. Buck on that?
Yeah, I know that you're right. We can move, the wellness and the salon, and we can shift that down to give, the more space up into that corner for a tenant like that. And what I envision happening is once we, start to really develop these plans and we start talking to different people to lease these spaces, they're going to have a lot of ideas, and there's going to be a lot of input put into the plans as they get developed with our architect. So I envision the next phase here, and once those tenants are on board, it's going to be, it's really going to evolve.
Okay.
If there's ways we can make it work for them with, maybe shifting the hallway, and we'll definitely be open to anything that we'll be able to do.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to assume bad things. I want to assume, you guys have been very adaptive, which I've been very impressed by. Not many people that work in an industry as specific as, senior housing like this often adapt, and you have worked with us to adapt and make this true mixed-use project. But the community has been, let down on this site before by, the current ownership. We've had it sitting vacant and turning to blight for 15 years. So, I'm reluctant to approve a site plan that doesn't, have that structure. So that's my concern.
We want the space to be as successful as possible, especially because it'll be in our building, and I understand the hesitation with, things that have happened previously, but we hope to change that for at least our section and get this thing moving and create a buzz and create spaces that are great for us and great mainly for the community at large. So.
Anything more, Dan?
No, I'll turn it over to Treasurer.
Yeah, I think Phil is next.
Yeah, thank you for the change. I like those as well. I'm with Trustee Wazinski and Opsimer. I'm really concerned about that corner cafe, the anchor to it being as small as it is. I think if we lay out the plans, 1,000 square, we'll get another Big B or another coffee shop that closes up at 5 o'clock. However, if we show a plan that had a decent sized space, 2 or 3 times, a real restaurant or something far more than just another Big B, we're more likely to attract that. Again, Jeff, I too like your flexibility. You came back with a revised plan that's awesome, but the mixed use portion of it, I really want to see diverse mixed use, and also it's an excellent opportunity to bring in a really decent restaurant that would be a real draw to the other businesses along there, and be a great anchor tenant for the other commercial spaces there. I'm just afraid that if with a drawing that shows 1,000 square foot there, we're not going to attract anyone serious there. And I too am reluctant to vote for this tonight with just the promise that, well, if the right tenant comes to us, we'll redraw it. What I'd rather like to see us do would maybe to table this for a meeting and have you come back with a revised drawing that had a larger anchor space, 2 to 3 times what we see now on out there, that could show a potential tenant. This is how you could be anchored here and how it would look with the building. That would give me a lot more assurance that we would have a better chance of attracting an anchor tenant, a real restaurant that would help us to redevelop that area in a way that it's not being developed now.
I will say that, so the cafe could take the wellness studio, the salon, the art studio, all that could be shifted down which would give that extra square footage to that cafe space. We've just labeled it the way it is now, but it is very interchangeable, I guess. So that's why, once we get into it with going out and seeing who has interest in that corner, who has, we're obviously, we need that cafe tenant. So it'll be kind of what they want. So, but I can do whatever on our plan to help satisfy your guys' worries that, we're not going to, do a 180 on you.
If I can comment, I'm sharing this concern, and I'm thinking that along the lines of cart before the horse. If you draw the lines the way they are now, it's going to discourage tenants from showing up because they're going to think this is already set this way, even no matter what you say. But if you could somehow draw this in a broader way, as been suggested by a couple of the trustees here, that might create more of a buzz. And then if you have to go back and make them smaller, you can. I think you got, by drawing it up front, is a lot of small spaces, you're going to limit who's going to be interested. Anyone else? Ms. Jackson.
I actually have a different kind of question, if I may. Mr. Buck, Hudson Senior Living is a building developer, is that correct?
Correct.
So will Hudson have any role in the leasing and the management of this building on a day-to-day operation?
We would be the owner of the building, and so we would be hiring the management company. And like our other properties, we are in we have managers and people set up, but we do own them, so we do oversee them.
You oversee them continuously.
Correct.
And that doesn't necessarily mean an on-site manager.
Not from Hudson. Hudson's it's me and somebody else. So I won't have an office there, but I'll be overseeing the manager of the building.
Okay. I think I understand better now. Thank you.
Yep.
Is there anyone here that wants to make any, Mr. Dreyfus? Yes, sir.
Thank you. So the first questions I had were just a couple of specifics, and I wanted to hear everybody go through their first round of observations and their own views on what needed to be improved and what they liked about it. And I do agree, but I agree with everybody had said, actually, but I have a bigger picture comments to make at this point. I wanted a way to kind of talk about what I would call more of like the sort of the vision, what we have for this corner of Hazlet. This is the four corners of Hazlet, equivalent to our four corners in Okemos. And we've talked a lot over the years about this particular area, and this has been the focus of a lot of citizen input and numerous people, previous managers and previous board members and previous planning commission members and previous planning staff have all been involved in trying to get this location to become productive and to be something that the community would be proud of and something that would be highly useful and desirable. And we scratched our heads for a long time on what that could be. However, there's always been some issue and problem and difficulty, it seemed, with the actual property owners. We've had numerous sort of blank spots in what we're dealing with and never fully understood sort of either the motivations or why things were or were not happening, whether they weren't being marketed appropriately, whether there was other tax and financial implications for the property that the owners were doing. There's been speculation as to why that property did remain vacant. So the answer that we always come up with is to try to explain away why we think it is this way. One of which is nobody wants to be there. We can't get businesses that want to be there. I'm not so sure that's always the reason. I'm not positive that that is the case. There are times in this township I've seen over the years where property owners wait a long time to try to find the right kind of applicant, a developer, where they can change the nature of the property and really can sell a property for more money, and really just becomes a lot more profitable to have it have one kind of use versus other kinds of uses. And so some property owners are willing to wait and pay the taxes over the years and wait for the right board to change the zoning, or wait for the right board to do the approvals and the SUPs and everything else that's needed, or the MUPUD in this particular case. When I look at this project, I'm looking at the big picture and says, what we're really doing is saying, we want to try to create a vibrant commercial area by having a residential component to this area. That's the first thing we're saying. We're all taking this for granted, but that's a big change right out the gate, saying we want this commercial area that we've long designated as the critical commercial area for Hazlet to now have a whole big residential component right there. Maybe in line with the PICA and the 2018 master plan, but it really wasn't thought of to be exclusively one type of tenant. I think the visioning was to be a broader mix, because it was believed that that would help support a more dynamic business mix in that area. What's being proposed is a particular target business scenario, providing this housing for seniors, and it's a certain type of seniors. That's what I was trying to make sure I understood clearly. This isn't the continuum of care with medical intervention. This seems to me to be middle class and possibly upper middle class seniors, people with some money enough to be able to afford to pay, market rent of, and again, I was trying to get a number, and I remember in the past we were saying $1,500 a month. That was one of some of the numbers that were being kicked around. So the concerns that I have about the project are we really envisioning how we want Meridian Township to be in the future, particularly in Hazlet? Do we really think that 133 units of seniors are going to support the commercial base that's being put around it alone? And one could argue that a couple of them will, maybe the restaurants, the cafe, maybe a hair salon. There's a few things that could be broader than the 133 people, but I have concerns that, again, the commercial component is not as important in the cash flow analysis that the 133 units are important. And so it's always a matter of saying, are we prioritizing commercial in that area? And in my particular feeling here is we're not still really prioritizing the commercial, partially because this is only one phase of the whole project. Again, the other part, the eastern portion of this, is still kind of vague and nebulous as to what that could be. And that's a critical aspect of trying to redevelop this whole part of the four corners of Hazlet. I like the idea that the cafe needs to be relocated so it can expand and have a more dynamic presence and attract people more than the 133 resident units that are going to be adjacent to it. I would like to go there if it's a good cafe and restaurant. I want to go there. I want to bring people to go there and meet there and have another place to eat. I'm concerned that the property owners were never on necessarily the same page. Of course, they have their own business objectives. And so I'm not, again, sure about what the vision is for how this is all going to really play out. And we're making a big choice by saying this is going to be a senior on the western portion of the property. It's going to be a senior complex. Maybe it's a good thing. These seniors are not medically incapacitated. I don't know, better word. I hope that's the right word. They're not medically compromised. They can be vibrant people of all ages from 55 to 100 and be totally vibrant and active members of our community and walk out that door. Remember, we had Mr. McConnell 2 weeks ago said, I'm concerned about connectivity between that facility and where people are going to go to other adjoining areas. How are they going to move around? How are they going to get from that building to other places? It does seem like it's an island. If you look at it, it stands on its own right there. So I'm glad to see the good plus is that there's the trail connectivity behind it that allows access for people to move and use non-motor bicycles and walking to connect to that pathway behind. That's a real plus. The questions I have again is, couldn't we still have multi-tenant type scenarios with a broader diversity of tenants? And couldn't this be thought out more along the lines of what's going on the eastern portion of the property as well? And don't we really want to try to get a handle on how this whole thing is going to play out in its entirety, rather than in a piecemeal approach, which may wind up meaning that we only have the residential side for a long time and the other side still remains vacant for an indefinite period of time. Those are my concerns and thoughts.
Treasurer DeShane.
Mr. Buck, I want to say again, you've brought us a great proposal here. I like it. It's good. It's attractive. The elevations are really stunning. It's going to redevelop that corner immensely. And I'm under no illusions at all that this is a commercial development that we're going to redevelop that whole four corners of this one project. It's a residential development, but you've taken the mixed use far more seriously and dedicated far more space than this board has seen in a long time. And I appreciate that. But to think we're gonna pack in a whole lot of commercial space and just keep adding on and adding it on, and you're gonna keep saying yes, 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 and develop this is just an illusion on this board's part. We've tried that in the past and it never worked out. We end up putting so much burden on the developer that they just walk away. And that's happened 3 or 4 times in downtown Okemos. And I don't want it to happen here in Hazlet. So you've got a really good proposal. What I would like you to do is just to bring back some revised drawings that show the potential expansion of that corner cafe so we can have a real restaurant there. That's really as much as I want to ask of you, because in this environment, I'm really excited that we're still talking about this proposal, and you are still wanting to build this project this year in downtown Hazlet. We need this development. We also need it to take the mixed use seriously, and we need to have a decent corner restaurant there or cafe. But I don't want to start piling things up and talk this proposal to death. And so that 2 years from now, we say, well, whatever happened to that Pine Village proposal? Well, we'll know what happened to it. We talked it to death, or we added to it until it became unattractive for any developer to want to go near it. So I don't want to go down that path. I think you've got a mixed use proposal here. You've explained to us what it is. It's a niche project. It's not the diverse housing we'll have in other places in the township. It's a very specified housing that you plan. It's going to be an attractive property. It's going to be a real draw. It fits the socioeconomic profile of Hazlet. It's going to be an excellent development there. But we do want to see more with the commercial area, at least I do, in that corner area, and show some room for expansion. That's the only caveat I'm putting on voting for this thing right now, is to see some envisioning of a larger commercial space. Thank you.
At this point, I'm not really hearing a consensus to go forward with the vote. Somebody want to make some sort of motion other than moving forward with the vote? Mr. Opsom.
I will move that we table this item until our next meeting.
Support.
That's been supported by Mr. DeShane. All those in favor of tabling? I guess.
Aye.
Well, we'll have to have Brett call our names.
Trustee Opsimer.
Aye.
Trustee Sunland.
You're
muted.
Kathy.
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski.
Yes.
Supervisor Stika.
Yes.
Clerk Drivers votes yes. Treasurer DeShane
Yes.
and Trustee Jackson.
Yes.
The motion is tabled 7-0.
Okay,
I mean,
it's just-
yes,
by quick explanation, Mr. Buck, I don't think there's what you heard is not, let's turn this down. What you heard is we need a little more tweaking on that first floor. So hopefully next meeting we can actually approve.
We'll make those changes and appreciate your guys' time. Thank you.
No, we appreciate your time too, and the project. Thank you. All right, we will now move on to, well, C is part of it, so I assume C will table along with that. Brett, we need to do something special or just have that happen?
I'm sorry, I did not hear that. I was talking to Betty.
Well, item C is the special use permit.
Yep.
Tabled the main one. Does that automatically go along with it, or do we have to do another motion?
I don't see a reason why we'd have to do another motion.
Okay, that's what I felt, but I didn't want to have it. Okay.
Yep.
We'll go on to D then, which is the 2020 local road program. Mr. Opsimer.
I move to approve the low bid from Michigan Paving and Materials of Lansing, Michigan, in the amount of $827,153.74 for phase 2 of the local road program. And also approve the low bid from Lopez Concrete in the amount of $522,777 for the 2020 concrete contract. Authorize Deputy Township Manager Derek Perry to proceed with projects.
Who supported?
I think this is,
Support.
oh, Ms. Jackson.
Jackson supported.
Get the main motion.
The motion was made by Opsimer.
Opsimer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Jackson supported. All right. Mr. Opsimer, you want to talk on this?
Yeah, I mean, as Deputy Manager Derek Perry outlines in the memorandum, this is for the more intensive reconstruction of road work. We already did phase 1, I think about 2 months ago. That was for the milling and hot in place recycling. This would be the full reconstruct, the most intensive reconstruction we are doing on the roads with the lowest pace rating in the first year of our 10-year road program. And then, of course, there's the pathway and water and sewer bid contract that is included with this for the adjacent work that needs to be done there. Obviously, we've already approved the roadways that are being done with this work. This is simply approving the actual bidding of that work. Deputy Manager Derek Perry, you want to share your thoughts on this and how the bids came back to what relative to what we expected?
I was just about to ask him that.
We actually received very favorable bids. We were pretty excited once these numbers were read out loud to us. We're just excited to get going. They line up well with what we were expecting and the funding we have in place. So between first phase 1 and phase 2 and the concrete work and the work we're doing in conjunction with the county in a couple locations in the township, it's shaping up to be an excellent 2020 for our local road program.
How many miles are we getting, Deputy Manager Perry, out of for this work of intense reconstruction?
The crush and shape's a little over 2 miles out of the total 10.24 that we're doing.
So we're getting a little over 400,000 per mile, which isn't too bad. I've seen 3 or 4 inch hot in place recycling cost that much, so that's not too bad.
Yeah, the number of miles has really helped us get favorable bids, and the price of asphalt per ton it was been a good number too for us. So
my final question,
Go ahead.
sorry, just one more question. The Levitt and Stark Excavating, I have not heard of them before. Are they new to the road building industry in the area?
They do a lot of underground utility construction, but they do have a solid skill set in road construction. But a lot of them, it's not unusual for them to also have concrete skill set too.
Okay, thank you.
Just for explanation before we move forward with this. This is the second phase that we're voting on tonight. What's still remaining on this year's construction?
The only thing that would be remaining would be the preventative maintenance, the crack sealing. And we're developing that program in-house and hope to go to bids on that here shortly. And that's the additional miles that we're looking to preserve in the township.
So that's how we get to the 10 miles eventually?
That's how you get to the total for the road plan.
Right.
So the 10.24 is the actual resurfacing work. Phase 1, the board approved that on April 14th, and that was the majority of that work. And then
Right.
the additional 2.15 miles gets us at 10.24 of the actual resurfacing work.
Okay. Anyone else? Mr. Shea.
Yeah, Derek, did you get an idea from Michigan Paving and Materials of Lansing when they might be likely to start this work? Do they have their are we likely to see a labor issue with them as well? Have they finally come to terms with their unions? And so what are you expecting in terms of the work to be done and when it might be completed for this phase?
We're not aware of any labor or union conflicts at this time. Again, who's to say 60, 90 days, but the concrete contractor is ready to roll actually this Friday, start some preliminary work. And all indications for the paving work would start the week after Memorial Day, probably first week in June. So they do have to give the concrete contractor a little bit of lead time. So probably first week in June, they would actually start in the Hiawatha neighborhood with that crushing and shaping work. And notices will be going out in the next couple days to the impacted residents and also the neighborhoods. So things are going to get rolling here shortly.
Great. And then our phase 4, we're doing in-house. You're going to let the bids out next week. When do you expect that work to commence and to finish?
The crack sealing work probably would be over late summer, maybe July and August. Typically, that's when we would like to get that crack sealing work done. It'll give us a little. We have to coordinate the other paving work with that, but we're thinking probably August for that work.
Anyone else? All right, I guess. Oh, Ms. Jackson, yes.
Yes, I'd just like to compliment Mr. Perry and his staff, I presume, on the presentation of this project and the transparency with which they present how the taxpayer funds are being allocated and spent in realizing this goal.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And unfortunately, it creates a longer memo, but yes.
Yes, but I understand it all.
Well, these days we have more time to read memos than we used to.
Great.
All right. Are we ready to vote then, everyone?
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Clerk. We can't hear you now, Brett.
Trustee Sunland,
Yes.
trustee Wazinski,
Yes.
supervisor Stika,
Yes.
clerk Dreyfus votes yes, treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
trustee Jackson,
Yes.
and trustee Opsimer.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Very
Thank
good. Okay, we're now moving on to the Meridian Township EDC COVID-19 Small Business Grant Program. This is on for action instead of discussion because time is of the essence. This comes out of the COVID emergency situation that we're in, and it has to do with trying to help out some of our businesses stay in business. So, Mr. Walsh, do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, before I turn it over to Mr. Lane, this came about less than a week ago. Supervisor Stika, I received a phone call that this is something he would like to investigate, and had a visit from Treasurer DeShane, and then a follow-up couple phone calls from Trustee Opsimer, all talking about the business programs that were going on in the region. And so with that, collectively, we turned it over to the EDC and decided to, this really has all come together within the week. So I'd ask Mr. Lane, I could talk about it, but makes sense to the person who did the work. But I really want to credit the people who came up with this idea. It's sometimes it's easier to put something in motion than it is to come up and press the idea. So Mr. Lane.
Thank you. Good evening, board members. As Supervisor Stika said, and as Manager Walsh said, you know, the board members and the Manager Walsh have gauged that the need is still great in the business community. The financial struggles continue due to COVID-19, and despite grant relief programs being implemented by both the federal government and the state, the need is still out there. So a lot of local communities are now considering grant and loan programs at the local level. And that was how the conversation sort of started at the EDC meeting this past week. I think the EDC, and I note before I forget, I noted there are a couple members of the EDC in the attendee area of the Zoom meeting. So I wanted to bring that to the board's attention before I forgot. At its meeting last week and its prior meeting, the EDC discussed a small business relief program that would be specific to Meridian Township. The design or the intent is to provide relief to small businesses struggling with financial difficulties due to COVID-19. And that would be done by refocusing resources onto existing business recovery rather than keeping them allocated towards sort of new business development. The documents that are in your packet tonight were reviewed and approved by the EDC on the 13th. They were borrowed heavily from a similar program that was administered at the state level by LEAP. And LEAP reached out to all its regional partners, including the township, and said, if you intend on doing your a local program, please feel free to use our forms, our documents, and our process if that's helpful. And it certainly was. So we relied on that rather than reinventing the wheel. The program that's before you tonight for your consideration, sort of a snapshot. The EDC has allocated $148,000 to the grant program. That funding $100,000 comes from the Meridian Redevelopment Fund, which, as the board likely knows, is a fund that was established 4 to 5 years ago and earmarked for new development and improvements really in the Pica areas. But as I mentioned, the EDC's thought was that perhaps to refocus a portion of that funding to really further recovery and revitalization of existing businesses that are really hurting during the COVID-19 crisis. An additional $40,000 of that amount would be a reimbursement to the EDC from a donation it made to the farmers market. And then the remaining township or $10,000 would come from the EDC's funds. Now, I'd like to mention too that the $40,000 that was donated to the farmers market and the $10,000 from the EDC funds, those funds are derived from proceeds that come from the EDC's service as a fiduciary to the Bircham Hills bonding. So the money comes from resources available to the EDC and not from the township general fund. The way the $140,000 or $148,000 is being proposed to be allocated would be 37 grants of $4,000 each. There's an application form that was included in your packet. As I mentioned, along with the other documents, it is borrowed heavily from LEAP. And one of the benefits to this proposal or this grant program proposed by the EDC is that the 168 businesses in Meridian Township that applied for a grant in the LEAP program and did not receive the grant would be able to use the application they submitted in that program for the EDC's program. So the thought was to really save the businesses a lot of time. They would be able to use the application they'd used in the LEAP program. Additionally, I've gotten a lot of help from Brandy Yates, the township's communication manager, and her department. The application that's before you, she has converted to a web form that, if the township board approves this program, will be on the township's website tomorrow morning, and it will be fillable electronically and submitted electronically. So it'll be really easy for businesses that had not applied for the LEAP program to also apply for the EDC program. If the board approves this, sort of the time frame that's laid out is the application period would open tomorrow. We're thinking 8 a.m., between 8 and 9 a.m. It would close on Friday at 5 p.m., the 23rd. And by way of comparison, that would be 3 days that the application period would be open. LEAP's program was open for just a little over 4 days. East Lansing's DDA had a similar program that was open for 2.5 days. And the city of Lansing's EDC had a similar program that was open for 3 days. So we're in line with what some of the other programs, their application periods. Obviously, if the board approves this, the communications department is going to work to get the word out through a press release and on the township website and social media sites. Applications would be submitted by the 23rd. They would be scored by a review committee that would be comprised of the EDC chair, the DDA chair, a member of the township board, the township manager, and myself. That committee would be advisory. It would review and score the applications based on categories and criteria provided in the documents you have. And then it would make recommendations of the top 37 finalists to the EDC. And the EDC is slated to have a special meeting on the 29th to approve the 37 grant finalists. Everything goes according to plan. Checks would be issued on June 2nd. And it's an aggressive timeline, but as Supervisor Stika said, the need is out there, so we wanted to move this along really quickly. There are a number of documents that came with it. I'd be happy to walk through the documents if the board would like, but I don't want to keep talking if everyone's read through them and doesn't have any questions.
Okay, would someone like to make a motion? Mr. DeShane.
Sure. I move to approve, excuse me. I move to approve the Meridian Township Economic Development Corporation Small Business Relief Grant Program as attached.
Support.
Supported by Ms. Wazinski. You want to talk about this, Phil?
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to start off with some questions for Director Lane. Ken, how many applications did the MEDC get from, LEAP get from Meridian Township? How many did they get and how many did they approve?
For the grant program that they LEAP administered from the MEDC, they received 168 applications from Meridian Township, and 3 of those were awarded grants.
So 165 Meridian Township businesses applied for a grant from LEAP and were turned down.
Correct.
Okay. You know, this crisis we're in is first and foremost a health crisis, but it's resulted in an economic crisis. And the latest numbers are 36 million Americans lost their jobs, 1.7 million here in Michigan. We don't know the number here for our area, but it's up there. These are depression era numbers. And of course, we live in a consumer-driven economy, and so people don't have jobs, they don't spend money, and so businesses suffer. Did a little research and found that after a disaster like this one, only 40% of businesses open up again. So I'm going to support this because if we can keep, of the 37 grants, we keep 10% of those businesses open, hopefully more than that apply, that receive grants, that will be a success. Because it takes so much energy and capital and drive to open up a business. But then one disaster like this one, and businesses, due to the overhead requirements that they have and the lack of demand from their customers, years of planning and work are suddenly evaporate. So we've got some great local businesses in this township, Henry's Place, Bluegill Grill, Schuler's Books, and some of those at the mall, like Schuler's Books, Tinker Lab, High Caliber Karting, Playmakers. You can go on and talk about our local businesses that define this community and make us the great place, that contribute to the great place that Meridian Township is to live. Some of those will be eligible for this grant, others wouldn't. But these small businesses are the heart of our community, and they make living here easier and add to our quality of life. I would be very interested in knowing how many applications we get, and I would like to think of this as an important first step, but it may not be the only step we take. If all 165 apply for these grants, or even 150 of them, and the review committee comes back to report to the EDC saying, we gave out 37 grants, but we could have given out 137 grants because the need was there. These are local businesses, and they're on the cusp of closing. I think this board's going to have to look at that report. If we get that report, look at it and say, maybe we need to do more and go back to our development fund. That development fund, redevelopment fund that we've been sitting on for years was a good thing. We were looking for a high profile project that we could use to kick off, maybe the Village of Oaklands. But in this purpose and this time, if we can use this money to keep existing businesses open, that would to me, be the highest and best use of that money. Well, we still need new development, but we've certainly got to hold on with all of our might and any capital that we can help them with through the Economic Development Fund to our existing businesses, and do what we can to throw them a life preserver in this really, really tough time. So for those reasons, I'm going to be supporting this.
Mr. Opsimer?
Yeah, so first I just want to say thank you to Supervisor Stika and to Manager Walsh and Director Lane and the EDC on carrying this out expeditiously and getting it on our agenda this evening and working through the logistics of doing it. The idea is a simple notion, but actually carrying it out and having a plan is quite extensive. Director Lane, I just have one question as it relates to the business eligibility and as it relates to the 168 businesses that you cited that applied for the LEAP grants for that state funding. So item 9 is the business was formed and headquartered in Meridian Charter Township. So by my reading of that, even if it's a local chain where they opened a second location in Meridian Township, but their primary location is outside of Meridian Township, they would not qualify. Is that correct? Or
That is correct. The thought by the EDC was they really wanted to narrow the scope of the applicant pool and really make this tailored to small businesses within Meridian Township that were formed and, created in the township.
Okay. And so with the LEAP program, since that was state funded, did their program vary in terms of how it defined those 168 businesses? Would those 168 all meet that definition or that criteria in item 9?
For the grant program, no, that was not included. For their companion loan program, yes, that was one of the criteria, is that they had to be formed and headquartered in the Tri-County area.
Okay, so some of those businesses might not, because it could be like a chain that's in the area but wasn't formed and headquartered here. So there might not be 168, but it's still going to be a very significant list. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. My other question, I don't know that it gets at this so much because of how narrow the focus is, and I'm okay with that as a start to this program. I think we should support the businesses that started here in Meridian Township. But have we spoken to the mall, and how is their vacancy rate changing, and how many tenants have lapsed on their rent due to COVID-19? The mall is kind of a unique situation where there's a lot of businesses that don't meet that criteria of being headquartered in here, but it is our largest taxpayer and it's the anchor of all the commercial that surrounds it. It creates the draw that, Meyer and the mall really create the draw for all the adjacent commercial in that area.
A member of the EDC works for the company that owns and operates the Meridian Mall. He did report at the EDC meeting that, I'm going from memory, but I don't believe he said they've had any closures yet due to COVID-19. But obviously the mall's been closed since the stay-at-home order was first implemented. So I'm sure a lot of those businesses are struggling. However, Sean Dunham, who's the representative, he's a member of the EDC. He works for the company that owns the mall. He reviewed the criteria, and I actually think he made the motion to approve the program as it's presented to the board this evening.
Okay, thank you. If you could just keep in contact with Mr. Dunham as it relates to the mall and their changing circumstances. I just think that's something we should be in contact with them on, each week as the situation evolves.
I will. Thank you.
But aside from that, I'm ready to support this tonight. I was happy to see the grants were. It's tough to define meaningful and impactful, but some of the other programs that this was modeled off of, it was as low as $2,500 grants. And when you take into account, even just an employee making $15 an hour with the payroll taxes and everything, it just doesn't go very far. So I wanted, I had recommended $5,000 grants and perhaps a few fewer to start, but I'm happy to support the proposal that's before us this evening, and thank you.
Mr. Walsh had wanted to comment.
Just really quickly, a couple things. I don't know if you wanted Mr. Supervisor to include in your motion or who's going to serve from the board. I don't know if you want that in the motion. And the second thing is, whoever does serve on this committee is going to have to sign a confidentiality and an ethics clause because we're dealing with local businesses and people we might know. We're going to have to make sure that there's transparency and ethics involved with anyone who's making a recommendation on this. Any relationships that anyone has will have to be brought forward, whoever serves. Thank you.
I think Ms. Jackson had her hand up.
Yes. First, I commend the township board members and the staff who quickly brought this idea forward through the DDA or the EDC. I'm sorry, but I am currently prepared to support this proposal. But I have just one question of Mr. Lane. Mr. Lane, do you have any idea how many businesses there are in Meridian Township that fit this criteria outside of the 168 that apply to the LEAP program?
Trustee Jackson, I apologize, I do not. I do believe I've reached out and given sort of a heads up to the businesses that applied for the LEAP program. You know, I was careful to say that everything was contingent on board approval, but I wanted to give them an early notice that this program is being considered. Of the 165 that I contacted, I believe that all of them would qualify under the business eligibility requirements that we have in place.
Would you guess that there are many more than 165 or 68 that could that do exist in the township?
Yes, absolutely. Many more.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Dreyfus.
Thank you. I was very happy to hear about this program primarily because of something that I brought up in the past at the Planning Commission and also brought it up at the previous boards. And that is a program called the Strong Town Approach by Charles Marone. It's an organization that he started. It's an international, a group that goes around the world basically and looks at ways of revitalizing communities by using a bottom-up approach. They call it the revolution from below, bottom-up approach, and starting with small grants, using small amounts of resources and high leveraging. That's what it's all about. It's about small amounts, highly leveraged with community buy-in and support, usually because there's an emotional commitment to what's going on. And this fits the bill for all of that. Small businesses have a lot of skin in the game. $4,000 goes a long ways. I think it's a very good sum of money. And I think that it does help when it's small business in this type of crunch. And I think it's the right approach to take. And I'm glad to see that we're able to provide that kind of assistance in this crisis.
Thank you. Other board members. Yes, Ms. Wozinski.
I also am ready to fully support this. I being a spouse of a small business owner, not here in Meridian, but still recognizing how much stress it's put on small businesses and knowing that every little penny counts. 4,000 certainly is a start, but I think we need to think long term if there's a way we can help our businesses. It's important. Small businesses are like families, and I know for us it's been really stressful to know that our family's struggling. And so I think it's really important. I 100% support it. I also would just echo that I think maybe long term this isn't going away, and if we want to keep these families and these businesses here, we got to think a long term as well. So I 100% support this, and I thank you, Dr. Walsh and Director Lane and the EDC for really thinking this through and doing this so quickly.
Okay, any other board members at this point? Mr. Apser?
Yes, just one other question. Manager Walsh, what is the current balance on the redevelopment fund? Is it 700 and change or just over 800,000?
Trustee Opsmer, it is exactly 700,000, and the initial amount of that 570 came from the sale of the Mart, and then 3 years ago, the board had some extra funds in the budget and decided to put 130,000 of the revenue into the fund to make it 700,000. So if this moves forward, the redevelopment fund will still have a corpus of $600,000.
Okay, so that's helpful. Thank you. Just for everyone's, thought process moving forward, if there are in fact 165, just as an example, businesses that meet these criteria, the $4,000 grants would, if you multiply that out, that would be 660,000. So the redevelopment fund does have capacity to carry this forward based on at least the current projections that we have based on the other applications for LEAP, but we'll have to see what happens with this. Thank you.
Supervisor, you're muted.
Yeah. Sorry. Mr. Walsh, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to, sometimes you hear things from citizens that resonate with you and they stick with you when you're looking at an issue. And when this first came up, when the supervisor called me and said, let's look into doing this, I think we ought to do it. Didn't really sound like maybe something we wanted to jump into, but I had a conversation with a citizen, Renee Corey, who's on our DDA. And what she told me made all the sense in the world. She said, Frank, this is like Comcast. This is like Comcast, who comes out and every time you turn around, you're a customer and or any company, and they're offering new customers 3 months free or a month off or doing this. Everything's always for new customers. And when you've been a customer for something for so long, you don't get any of the breaks that come up. They're always for the future. They're always for new people. What about us? And she said, that's exactly what we have here. Everything is, this redevelopment fund is for new business and new people to come here. And it would be great if you take the supervisor's suggestion and others and move forward with this, because this is something for our existing businesses, the people who are here, who are our bread and butter. And I thought, you know what, Renee, that makes a lot of sense. So I thought I'd pass that along because it kind of, for me, brought it to 360.
I guess I'll give a little bit of, Mr. DeShane, yes.
I do want to talk about the 9th criteria for eligibility. This formed and is ordered in Meridian Township. I know why we're doing that. We don't want chain restaurants like Taco Bell applying for a grant. We want to keep it local. But in the review criteria, we do give points for ownership of residency. And so we do reward that. And this is likely to be a competitive process. And those extra 5 points make all the difference. My concern about number 9 is, what if a business was formed just west or in East Lansing, and they move over to Meridian Township a few years later? Now and they've been a successful business here, we've just disqualified them. So I think we get what we want. We want to reward local businesses, and we certainly have that in the 2nd criteria as well. We're giving 30 points for community impact history Meridian. So we care about their history. We care that they're a real community partner for us. So we reward that with the points. But again, they could have been a company that moved elsewhere. They're now home in Meridian, but we've disqualified them because they weren't originally created here. Director Lane, are you worried about that at all, that we might disqualify a good local business that just didn't happen to have been formed here?
Certainly, I don't think I or the EDC want to disqualify a business as you described. But when we were putting this together, the EDC was very clear that they wanted to really narrow the pool down, and keep it so that really give an advantage to businesses that were formed here or they're headquartered here. And that was why that 9th criteria was added. You know, I still think we're going to get a very broad pool of applicants with all 9 eligibility requirements. So, and the EDC thought so too, and that's why it remains in what's presented to the board tonight.
I want to make a couple of general comments because, as Manager Walsh has pointed out, I didn't think of this. It was done in a lot of other places first, but I sort of pushed it to happen here. You know, we need to help all of our residents right now in this economic crisis that the virus caused, and that includes our residences who are small businesses. Empty storefronts and empty restaurants, if they end up going out of business, negatively impact the entire township. We're primarily a residential township, but we also want to be a walkable community, and the small businesses, the local places, are part of what make a residential community work, because you can walk to them, you can bike to them, you can find what you need locally. It's all very important. And if we end up with a lot of empty storefronts, we end up with property values maybe falling a bit throughout the township. The appeal of our community as a prime community, as well as these, there's even an environmental factor. I mean, if you have to go to East Lansing or Lansing to get something, you're burning gas or whatever that you don't need to if you can get it local. It's all a good thing to try to keep these small businesses going. The $4,000 amount is a sort of a compromise from something like 2,500 that East Lansing did, or 5,000 like Mr. Opsimer mentioned would be a good one. But when you think about it, talking to small businesses, 4,000 often is in the range of what they may pay for a monthly rent, or certainly could be paying for a couple of employees, but at least they can keep a couple of employees on the payroll. And that's all pretty important, I think, to all of us. I think this is a good plan. I'm glad all of you seem to be very positive about it. And as far as the source of funds, we could add a little bit more, you know. It's been referenced that the development fund has 700,000 in it, and we're only taking 100 out of it. We could take a little more. We could take a lot more if we want to go down to giving something to everybody. But I think the idea of keeping the original 570 is if, in fact, the current development that's been proposed for downtown Okemos should happen, they've been looking at that 570 as part of their financial picture. We don't want to cause something that's going to cause that to kind of fall apart, even indirectly, unintendedly. I'm thinking that maybe we could add another 30,000 and 45 grants before we actually go to a motion, because we don't have one. We have a motion. Yes, we do have a motion. All right. Anyway, what do people feel about adding another 30,000, which would take our development fund down to the 570 that is the base amount? Mr. Opsimer.
I will move that we amend the original motion to add 32. I'm sorry, hold on, let me double check my math. You want to add 30,000 more, is that what you're proposing?
Out of the development fund, yes.
Yeah, so I will propose that we amend the original motion to add 8 more grants in the amount of $4,000, which totals an additional $32,000 from the redevelopment fund.
Yeah, the actual original proposal, there was like an extra 2,000 that didn't quite fit. So this makes it out even. Is there a second to that motion? Courtney? Thank you. Any discussion of that? All right. All those in favor of the motion? Brett, you want to call us out? We can't hear you, Brett.
Is this the amendment or the main motion?
The amendment to add another 30,000, get up to 40.
Trustee Wazinski,
Yes.
Supervisor Stika,
Yes.
Clerk Dreyfus votes yes. Treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
Trustee Jackson,
Yes.
Trustee Opsimer,
Yes.
Trustee Sutherland.
Yes.
Amendment passes 7-0.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion on the whole program as laid out? Mr. DeShane?
I'm glad we could expand a little bit here. I think we'll know more in 2 weeks since we've gotten the applicants in hand. We know what the first round of grantees is. We might satisfy this initial demand. We might find that there's a whole lot more out there. So I think we need to keep in mind for our next meeting about going back. Well, I too would like to preserve the original redevelopment fund. It might not be practical at this time with the demand that's out there, the need that's out there to keep our small businesses going. But let's keep an open mind. We'll see where we're at in 2 weeks.
Okay, well said. Anyone else? Then let's vote on the entire thing, Brett.
Supervisor Stika,
Yes.
Clerk Dreyfus votes yes. Treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
Trustee Jackson,
Yes.
Trustee Opsimer,
Yes.
Trustee Sunland,
Yes.
and Trustee Wazinski.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you all very much. I think we did a good thing there. Our last item, no, not our last, our next item. Police Academy Sponsorship Program.
Mr. Supervisor,
Yes.
I still don't know that you cleared up who's to serve on that committee.
Oh, all right. Yeah, the way the program that we adopted said was a member of the township board. I was planning on volunteering myself to serve on it, but I could easily have another member, and I know Ms. Jackson expressed an interest. Do we need a motion to actually approve who's going to be on it? Brett, you have your hand up for some reason?
No, I was just going to say that I supported this. I think the supervisor should be the person to do this particular one because of your role. I think that it's appropriate because of the nature of this particular one and the amount of people involved that you would be the appropriate person for this.
Mr. Opsimer.
I will make a motion then that we appoint Supervisor Stika to serve on behalf of the board.
Support.
Second. Ms. Jackson also was interested in serving, but I guess we have a motion right now to have it be me. Need a vote, I guess.
All right, Clerk Dreyfus votes yes. Treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
Trustee Jackson,
We
Trustee
couldn't hear you,
Jackson.
Pat.
Yes.
Trustee Opsimer,
Yes.
Trustee Sunland,
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Is there a motion to add a second member of the from trustees? Mr. Opsimer?
I will move that we add Trustee Patricia Herring Jackson to serve on the board as well.
Second.
Support.
Yeah, I would, that she has been very much involved with the EDC, so has a distinct interest in this. Any other discussion? Oh, okay, we need a vote on that.
Does the process that we approved, does the process we approved have 2 board members involved in that?
No, but this would add this motion would add a second one. So it would do 2 things. It would add a second one and make Ms. Jackson that second one.
Okay, so what the motion is move to, what is the motion?
Add a second board member to the committee and in the person.
In the person of?
Ms. Jackson.
Okay.
Pat Jackson.
Did you? Okay. Got it. Treasurer DeShane,
Yes.
Trustee Jackson,
Yes.
Trustee Opsimer,
Yes.
Trustee Sunland,
Yes.
Trustee Wazinski,
Yes.
Supervisor Stika,
Yes.
Clerk Dreyfus votes yes. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Now we're moving on to the authorization for police academy sponsor. Mr. Walsh, are you talking on that or somebody else?
Well, I'll just simply introduce it. You may recall this is a similar program that the board was involved with maybe 2 or 3 years ago. and where was the sponsoring an individual to go to the academy. And we have another candidate that we'd like to introduce to you tonight and talk about whether the board wants to, again, support this sponsorship to the academy. So at this time, I would turn it over to Chief Blaga to discuss the candidate and where we're at. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good evening, Mr. Supervisor, board members. We have been through the budget process. We requested funding to sponsor a candidate to the academy, and these expenditures were budgeted, and we've been seeking a qualified candidate. I don't know if you remember Officer Lorenzo Velasquez. He celebrated 2 years with us. He was a local person from the Hazlet area, and we sponsored him through the academy, and he's doing a great job for us now. Ms. Sierra Alvarado was identified by our group of folks that we have out going and recruiting applicants. Ms. Alvarado just graduated from Michigan State University, and she has her father lives here in Okemos, and she lives in the township actually up off of Hagedorn Road. Grew up in the DeWitt area, graduate from Lansing Catholic High School, and so just a wonderful young lady that would be an excellent fit into our organization, and we're hoping to have her attend the academy beginning late August and graduating in December. You're muted, sir. You're still muted, sir.
I thought I was getting good at that. And this meeting, I've not been good at all. Ms. Jackson,
I'm prepared to make the motion.
go ahead.
I move to sponsor candidate Sierra Alvarado to the Mid-Michigan Police Academy fall semester at Lansing College.
Support. I might have got you on it instead.
Was that support for Mr. Opsimer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, need to discuss that we've had a very successful one time around with this in the past.
That's certainly the one.
Time to do it again. Mr. Dreyfus.
So I have a question. Yeah, certainly it's a great program. It's good to be proactive and get some recruitment. But I do have a question about how this person was selected. You mentioned a sort of a recruitment team. Who is the recruitment team, and how was this particular individuals identified as opposed to anybody else that could have been identified?
So we have 4 officers that comprise our recruitment team. They go to various college campuses along with MSU, with Miss Marks on occasion also accompanies them. This young lady is also familiar with an officer that works over at MSU and expressed a desire to get involved in law enforcement. She referred her to us, so she kind of sought us out and began that dialogue through the background process and also looking at her credentials. She was selected as a viable candidate. And what our main goal is to really find people that want to be involved in law enforcement that are from the community. We've hired folks before that are from outside the community, good officers, but they don't stay. And so when we can find a qualified candidate that realistically, Miss Alvarado was in school to be pre-med. She was getting ready to go to medical school in her senior year. She identified that she wanted to get into criminal justice and started seeking opportunities. And she came seeking us partially. And then through discussion, that's how we identified her. But we attend job fairs all over the state, but we really try to recruit from the mid-Michigan area so that we can focus on retention.
Thank you.
Mr. DeShane.
Yeah, I want to commend you, Chief Blaga, for creating that subcommittee and giving them the time to do this outreach. I mean, diversity has been a goal of this board all 4 years that I've been on the board. And only way you achieve diversity is to be proactive about it, or the best way to achieve it. And not only find diverse candidates, but excellent candidates like this one and the previous one that we, Officer Alvarez. So again, to you and your team, thanks. You are fulfilling the board's goals by being proactive and creating this search committee.
Thank you, Treasurer Duchesne. I want to also thank the manager for his support, and Ms. Marks. She also is a huge help for us when we are out seeking new employees.
And just for the record, I believe this is included in your general budget for the police, is it not, Mr. Plaga?
Yes, we submitted the $8,000 for the tuition and cost of attending the academy, and the salary is put in place for the number of officers that we are authorized and budgeted to have.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay, let's move forward with this one then. Did we have a motion?
Yes, I read the motion.
Okay, I'll make sure. Easy to lose track. Go ahead, Mr. Dreyfus. You're doing a STICA now. You're not, there you go.
Trustee Jackson,
Yes.
trustee Opsimer,
Yes.
trustee Sunland,
Yes.
trustee Wazinski,
Yes.
supervisor Stika,
Yes.
clerk Dreyfus votes yes, and treasurer Duchesne.
Yes.
Motion passes 7-0.
Great. Look forward to having a great new applicant become a member of this force in a year or so, right?
Thank you very much. Thank you, board.
All right. We now come to our discussion items, and we have one discussion item. We have Ms. Darla Jackson with us to talk about the Meridian Cares program. You know, we help small business today, and there's a lot of people out there that need help, and she could tell us about that. Ms. Jackson?
Good evening, and thank you for having me. For any members of the public that are out there that are not aware, Meridian Cares has existed for well over 40 years to help residents of Meridian Township to make sure that they don't kind of fall through the cracks, to make sure that people don't end up hungry or on the street. Most of what we end up helping out with is evictions and utility assistance up to this point. I think this program is very unique to this community. It shows a certain amount of empathy on behalf of the public. And I've never known another community to have this kind of program. Now, that said, when the stay-at-home order was issued, I will be the first to admit that I was super nervous, and I had this ominous feeling that there was going to be like a tidal wave of need. So far, to my great surprise, I have not seen that. It actually is likely due to a number of factors. For one thing, you know, this economic stimulus hit. There's higher amounts people receiving unemployment. There's a moratorium on evictions. There's a reprieve from utility shutoffs. And people who receive food assistance from the state now receive a greater allocation generally. So I think that's provided a lot of economic relief up to this point. The moratorium on evictions lasts for another few weeks. That makes me a bit nervous. Most of the people that I've talked to for the last 6 weeks were not aware that they qualified for a lot of these programs, or they didn't know how to access them. So part of the problem is we know that there's a lot of unemployment. We know that some of that unemployment is going to last into the future. I've looked at economic forecasts, and they're kind of all over the board. Some of the ones that I was reading from as early as March anticipated that up to 400,000 people from Michigan would be unemployed. Well, we now know that that is horrifically low, that now it's 1.7 million people. So it's a little difficult to try to say exactly what the need is going to be. We do know that the restaurant and entertainment industry, they are predicting, will be the slowest to rebound. And unfortunately, women have been hit harder than men as far as unemployment is concerned, which does not bode well for single parent households since they generally are headed by women. So historically, what we have done is we have had people call to access Meridian Cares, and we try to get them into mainstream resources, get them into whatever they may qualify for. And if that doesn't work, then we use funding that's generally been privately raised to assist them. They've only been assisted once per year generally. With massive unemployment that's been going on for this long, we're likely going to have more people that need assistance, and they're going to need assistance more than once. We're going to need to create a new model. So since mid-March, since the stay-at-home order was issued, we have raised about $14,500. That, based on all the information that we have, will likely not be enough. Historically, Meridian Cares has spent between $10,000 and $12,000 a year, although last year it was much closer to $17,000. But that was serving people that had relatively low expenses and with a pretty tight labor market and a low unemployment rate. With people unable to return to work quickly, those costs are going to go up, especially when we take into consideration the fact that, you know, it's now May 19th. The courts haven't been in session since March. And when they reopen in June, we have the potential to see rent bills that are thousands and thousands of dollars. That is very disconcerting to me. Most of the households that I generally have talked to in the past have lived paycheck to paycheck, and they were kind of used to these kind of scenarios. What I've been seeing a little bit more are people who have greater expenses that aren't used to this system, that kind of need a little bit of walking through how to get assistance. And it's quite possible we're going to see different expenses that people need assistance with, whether it's mortgage payments, cell phone payments, childcare, and they're overall more expensive. So I think some of the biggest variables that we have at this point is the length of time that we're in the stay-at-home order, how long the virus lasts, if there are secondary waves, the potential of another federal stimulus, what happens at MSU, whether they have funding cuts or whether they go to online classes, any federal or state funding for other human service programs, and of course, consumer confidence. Now, we are trying our best to be prepared for whatever lies ahead for us, but at this point, it's extremely difficult. So unfortunately, that is where everything has been for my office for the last 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay. Couple questions. One, what is your current balance in the funds that you do have, darling?
The current fund balance, that is, okay, so it is about $28,000, and I have access to about another $7,000 on PayPal.
So how much was that altogether then?
It is about $35,000.
Okay. Okay. And do you have any, based on what you've seen and what you've been looking at, do you have any idea whatsoever when the demand is going to hit in terms of demands on your office and the funds that you have?
Sorry, I didn't catch that.
I would anticipate that it, and I'm sorry to laugh.
Yeah, it's all right.
I would anticipate it will be probably in about a month. The moratorium on evictions lasts until, I do believe, June 10th or 11th.
Okay,
Once that's over, then, courts open back up, and then you'll see a lot of really large housing bills.
one of my thoughts was, how much time would you need for us to react in terms of trying to supplement your funds if we decide to do that? When would you kind of have a handle on that? Right now, it's
Probably in,
right.
I'd say safely in about 5 or 6 weeks.
Okay, so we do have some more meetings ahead.
Mm-hmm.
Board members, discussion, Mr. Opsmer.
Yeah, so thank you, Manager Walsh, and thank you, Darla, for having this agenda item on. So I raised this with Supervisor Stika and Manager Walsh for the very reason that you kind of get to there at the end, and it's kind of adapting our needs. One of the things that came to my mind that's essential right now that we didn't used to look at as being essential would be broadband and internet access. So every single student in the entire community is now learning virtually, so they literally don't have any access to the virtual classroom setting that they rely on if they lose broadband. So that comes right to the forefront of my mind on things that we need to be covering with Meridian Cares that we haven't in the past. But I spoke to Ron about this, and you could make the argument that even outside of the pandemic situation, broadband internet is essential in today's day and age. Students still have to come home and do their homework and things like that. So perhaps some things that we adapt here with COVID-19 are things that continue on beyond this immediate issue. But cell phone bills is another one. I had contacted you about a resident, but in that instance, it turned out that the resident was not a resident here in the township, and we were able to get her cell phone turned back on, working with her provider. That's one of the other fears that I have. I think it benefits us to try to connect residents to Meridian Cares just for information too.
Right.
Because when we talk about the stay on evictions being lifted at some point, some of these residents are unfortunately not staying current on their rent, and so they're gonna, as soon as that EO does sunset at some point in the future, I think it will get extended again. But at some point, there's an end game there, and if they haven't worked out a payment arrangement, court proceedings could ensue the next day. So it's not just the financial assistance, but connecting with them to encourage them, because that's what I do a lot in Rep. Brixey's office, is encourage people, or in some cases call their provider, whatever that might be, directly, and try to help facilitate that and get them talking so that they don't get into this situation. And by and large, the private sector is pretty good at working with people. Just some people, some residents may not know that, and you don't know until you try and you call.
That's true. Part of the other challenge in what I have been working with lately is the human services field in general right now is a bit mixed up, because there are a lot of people that are not in their offices. People just aren't there. The state, the Department of Health and Human Services, they're still responding to requests, but outside of that office, there basically is not human services assistance out there.
And then just to label a couple of other things, and actually this was Trustee Wazinski's idea too when I spoke to her, but out-of-pocket healthcare costs. Obviously, that sparked an immediate thought in my mind about these families that are in unique situations that you brought up, Darla, which they have assets, so they don't necessarily qualify when they lose their private health insurance for any state program. They're not going to be Medicaid eligible. So what can we do to help people with the extravagant out-of-pocket costs that you inevitably incur if you don't have any coverage? Of course, most people, for the most part, aren't going to the doctor right now, but typically there's a a period in which when you're rehired, normally it's 90 days that you don't, you have to work for 90 days before you become active, invested in that healthcare benefit. So, I mean, this extends quite a ways out. And then beyond just, I just wanted to have this conversation so we could talk about, at least developing a plan for what we're willing to provide in the way of help and assistance. And so those were two ideas that I've kind of come up with in addition to the list that you've provided in the memorandum. My only other question was, what have we done recently to promote Meridian Cares? I know we typically put it in the Meridian Monitor and put it out on Facebook, but like we've talked about thus far, we're dealing with a situation where there's a lot of families who have never needed to seek financial assistance are now in a position of doing so. And, Meridian Cares is not the most, well-known, program out there. So what can we do to, raise awareness for it? And that would help us better identify the need too. Because I know in, Rep Brixey's office, we have about 350 families that we're currently helping to obtain their unemployment benefits. They're having a variety of technical issues. And so there's 350 families that have had little to no income. Some of those people are still working and they've only lost income, but many of them, the vast majority, have had no income since March. So they're basically living on a credit card or not paying bills.
So basically what I have done over the last few years is the information is out there. It's in the 211 database and it's in the Michigan Bridges database that they use to qualify for food assistance and those programs like Medicaid and that entire database. Most of the time when I'm making presentations, I do try to make the point, if you haven't heard of the program, it's because you don't need it. And I kind of still go with that, although in this climate, it's a little bit different. There may be a need to get the word out there, and I will work with communications to make sure that that happens a little bit better to reach the people that could potentially use it.
Okay. Courtney.
Darla, thank you for all your work on this. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that I've not really known about Meridian Cares before I became a township representative. However, learning more and more, it's imperative we have this, and I thank you and everybody that contributes to Meridian Cares, and Trustee Opsmer is a huge advocate of Meridian Cares. So I thank you all. To build upon what Trustee Opsmer said about being a public health professional, I worry about healthcare. And I know we're in a response mode, but I worry also about preventive care. So the co-pays to get, I know people aren't going to the doctor right now, but it doesn't mean people shouldn't be going to the doctor for certain things. And then another really large concern for me is mental health. And as we go every day further into this pandemic, I know that the stress really affects people. And if you don't have healthcare coverage, you don't have mental health care coverage. And so one of the things I want to work on is getting that information out to people, that where do they find relief if they need it, whether it be for family care, couples counseling, children, whomever might need that. This is only becoming more stressful. So that's just one other concern that I have, that I would like to at least provide some resources either on our website, because there is resources in Meridian for free, if not help with mental health as well. So again, thank you. And that's just one thing that, I can help with if needed.
Okay. Yeah, you are correct. The mental health aspect is vital right now, and I think we could do more to get that information out there right now.
Thank you.
Anyone else want to talk about this? Mr. Deshane? You're pulled a stike also. You're muted.
Darla, I too want to commend you for the good work you've done recently and you've done over the years for Meridian Cares. And I think you're getting the sense from Trustee Opsimer, and I would back that up. What the board would like would be a comprehensive look as to what these needs are going to be. And it's a changing crisis and changing world. And so it may take some new filters, some new looking in different places than we have in the past. But if you would get back to us about mental health and even the basic services such as internet. I do know that my wife is a school teacher in Leslie, and at the time of the lockdown, they surveyed all their families to see what percentage had internet access at home. And Leslie's a pretty rural community. They found 40% of the homes lacked internet access. So what they needed to do for those students was to provide them with all the coursework in paper format. It was just too expensive to provide 40% of their homes with internet access. Now, I'm sure our percentage is much lower than 40% in Meridian Township, but if you check with the Hazlet Public Schools, East Lansing, and Okemos, they've probably had that number as to what percentage of the homes lack internet access that might need some help in that regard. I did want to clarify something for those people watching this and hadn't heard of Meridian Cares before, and clarify that this is not township general funds that it provides. The money that you provide to families is money that's raised by the board and raised to various fundraising events for Meridian Cares. And secondly, a lot of the work you do, as I understand it, is leveraging existing resources and connecting the resident with other resources that might be out there that they didn't know about. So that was the first clarification I wanted to make. The additional money we're talking about providing Meridian Cares with tonight would again not be general fund money, but going into our redevelopment fund, which is money that we could spend for something like this, just as we can spend it on grants for small businesses, but we cannot use general township funds for either program. So we want to be real clear about that. We're not taking taxpayer money and providing to Meridian Cares or providing it to the EDC for grants. This is a special pot of money that is controlled by the Economic Development Corporation, and we can use it for special purposes, but we cannot use general funds for these purposes. That's all
Okay,
I need to say.
I'm not sure that we can't I'm not sure that statement is totally accurate. We have not had the practice and have not done it. But I'm not sure legally that we can't use general fund. Mr. Walsh, do you have anything on that?
I don't know the answer to that. I like you, I'd have to get the answer, the legal answer, whether you can use taxpayer dollars for this sort of funds.
I mean, we've chosen not to in the past. I would say that we have a couple things we need. We need Darla to keep us apprised of the need and her resources versus the need, how it's going. And secondly, we need Mr. Walsh to perhaps look at the budget and figure out if there are sources of funds that could be used or diverted to this if a need arises because of this special emergency situation. Mr. Opsimer.
Yeah, so question for Manager Walsh or Darla, whoever might know, but I mean, it was like 5 or 6 years ago, was it not, that Darla and Deb Guthrie created the event, the annual event that we hold for Meridian Cares, where we raise usually what's a significant portion of the funds. So how did we fund it prior to that? Did we just do private fundraising differently?
Yeah, I don't know about before that. Miss Jackson would have to answer that. But I know that about 5 years ago, we really kicked up our efforts and we had a huge event. In fact, we tied it into our team Christmas holiday party. And we had about 30 businesses donate baskets. And Darla, correct me anywhere I'm wrong. And yeah, Deb Guthrie really led this cause. And we raised, I think, Darla, I think we raised $10,000. That was our $10,000 year. We set a goal of 10,000, not knowing whether we'd hit it. And that is the year that we hit it through these fundraiser that we did with these baskets. And ever since then, that's really kicked off the success of Meridian Cares and raising money. That's my recollection of it, Darla.
Yes. Prior to that, it was small, private fundraisers, basically golf outings and things like that.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
Okay. Is there anything more you want to tell us, Darla?
I could go on for hours, but you don't want to hear it. It's already been 2.
Any other board members, anything? Okay, I think you know what we're looking for, Darla, and you know, if the need is there and there's, at this point, you know, you can't raise money fast enough to satisfy the need. I know that, that's the way things are. If we can help you, we'll try to find a way. That's my goal, at least. I'm sure other board members feel the same way. Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
We now go on to comments from the public again. Mr. Geebies.
Put the telephone number 517-349-1232 out there one more time if people want to use that. And of course, if they'd like to make a comment from the attendee portion, they're welcome to raise their hand using the raise hand feature inside the Zoom meeting, and we can respond to that. But telephone number one last time, 517-349-1232. And I'm not hearing anything ring, but if that changes, I'll let you know.
Okay, we are waiting to see whether anyone calls. And if they do, they'll be limited to 3 minutes when they speak after they give their names and addresses. And hopefully we'll talk on a topic that we dealt with or should deal with. Anything, Mr. Geebies?
There are no incoming calls at all, sir. I think you are safe to move forward.
All right, thank you. Then we move on to the other matters from the board members. I see that Mr. Deshane has had his hand up now for some time.
One part of the manager's report earlier on regarding the revenue conference they attended, they mentioned a $1 million shortfall in our revenue sharing from the state. I'd just like him to take a minute to address that shortfall and how we intend to address it here at the township.
Yeah, so Director Madison, who I believe is still on the in the meeting. So we took part in a webinar 4 or 5 weeks ago, like about 300 or 400 other municipal leaders across the state. And that's when the state informed us to predict about a 50% reduction in revenue sharing for the rest of the year. And so we began to put together a realignment plan and made some adjustments, and those adjustments have been made internally and will remain in effect until the end of the year. We're in a good place. Fortunately, after the revenue sharing conference, our losses are less than 50%, but they're still great. We're planning on a loss in revenue sharing of over 300. We know it's going to be over $300,000 for the rest of the year. And then coupled with our building permits, which are going to be down a little bit, and our parks fees, and we're planning on about a $500,000 loss for the remainder of the year. But a majority of that is the revenue sharing, and which, like I said, is about 316. Next year, we don't know exactly, of course, what that's going to be, but we anticipate right now, but we've made the adjustments in this $500,000 loss. So when we get the audit on June 2nd, we'll be then able in a place to come back to the board in June and say, okay, we've made the realignment. We've dealt with this revenue sharing loss of $300,000 and some in the next few months. Now here's your capital projects and here's some other things. And then the board will be able to tell us, based on good revenue numbers from Ms. Madison and myself, exactly where we're going to go forward. There's this misnomer that our revenue sharing is not going to be cut. And that's not correct at all. If you read the tables, you can see that we're going to have a cut coming up. So that's kind of where we're at. We're waiting for the audit to have more information.
Thank you.
Supervisor Sika, I hate to interrupt, but we do have Ms. Vaughn calling in for public comment.
Oh, sure. That's no problem. We can do that.
Ms. Vaughn, please state your full name and address for the public record.
My name is Phyllis Vaughn. My address is 6100 Baylog Court, Hazlitt.
And you can go ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is Phyllis Vaughn. I just want to tell you all thank you for all the work you're doing. And for the people that are on fixed income, when you were just talking to Darla, I don't know what happened after that because I dialed the number. But for people that are on fixed income, I don't think that Meridian Cares should be paying the rent and things like 3 months or whatever, because we got $1,200 as a subsidy, and most people got like $100 extra on their bridge card. That is that subject. Oh boy, are you guys timing me? I forgot. The taco truck. I know no one wants to talk about the taco truck, but right now is really not fair to the businesses that are trying to stay going. And you're giving grants to these small businesses, but the taco truck just opens whenever it wants. And I want to thank everyone who's reached out to help me in the past, 3 months. And take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that
Are
was,
there any other callers, Mr. Geeves?
there were no other calls. I apologize for interrupting.
All right, we're back to the board member comments.
Did I answer your questions about revenue sharing?
Yes, you did.
Okay, thank you.
Other board members, Mr. Opsimer.
Yeah, so I would just add on that revenue sharing piece, the township receives roughly 3.5 million these days in constitutional and statutory. And only 140,000 of that is statutory, which is discretionary for the legislature to appropriate. The vast majority of it, over 3.3 million, is constitutionally dedicated. So it fluctuates with sales tax revenue. So if sales tax revenue dips down, you're going to see your constitutional payment drop by a proportionate percentage. So that's really where we're at. I mean, short of a huge federal stimulus addressing that unique need, which is, there will have to be some kind of federal bill because the state has to balance a budget. The budget hole for the general fund and school aid fund is 2.2 billion. The state can't cut even like 300 million without gutting, Medicaid and other federal programs where we lose $5 in federal funding for every $1 in state funding. So there will be a federal bailout, but it gets a little tricky with local governments because every state funds them differently. Most states allow local governments to raise their own revenue by levying excise taxes, income taxes. Michigan is by far the most restrictive. So it'll be interesting to see, because if they're giving us a bunch of money for federal aid to local units, is there a demand in other states for that? So that'll be the unique thing that we'll have to wait and see. But, our revenue sharing will go the way of the state's sales tax revenue, and it won't be reflected on any of the treasury docs until the legislature goes through the informal process of amending the state budget.
Thank you. Ms. Wozicki.
A little off subject. Fiscally, I thank you, Trustee Opsimer, for giving us that information. It's hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes, so I appreciate that. I just wanted to end with a great big thank you to our first responders, Chief Plaga, Chief Hamill. It's I can't tell you how safe it makes my family feel that you're out there and that all your staff out there and all of our medical responders and even our grocery store clerks. So I just wanted to say thank you and just remind people, as we re-enter into open businesses, that we really need to think about staying safe. The numbers are coming down, but the testing rates are going up. So we might see a little bit difference there, and just making sure we, if you have symptoms, stay home. If you go out, wear a mask and make sure you're washing your hands frequently. So it's just a public health promote there for everybody in Meridian. Just thanking everybody.
Is that a hand up, Ms. Jackson, or you just, no? Anyone else? I would mention that in the session with our Congresswoman on last Friday, the bill that did go through the U.S. House of Representatives would help us. It did include money for even smaller municipalities down at our level. The problem is that it's just sitting in the Senate, not likely to move without a lot of changes. So we can't count on that money whatsoever at this point. Okay, and I also want to join in what Courtney said about just appreciating everybody out there, whether they're a first responder or even people who are, helping with their groceries and giving people rides in buses and everything else. I mean, they're all at greater risk than those of us who stay home, and we truly appreciate it. Okay, anyone else? If not, we're ready to adjourn. Nobody wants to
move to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Moved by Dan Officer, supported by Mr. Deshane.
The time is 8:30.
We could just say, all those in favor say aye.
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 Is there anybody opposed? Nope. Okay, thank you, we're done.